As you can see, Natalie and I have the genetic disorder called Fragile X syndrome. Fragile X syndrome, also known as FXS, is a genetic condition caused by a mutated gene on the X chromosome. Fragile X typically affects males more than females, and those affected by Fragile X may have a range of developmental problems at the age of 2, such as delayed speech. This disorder can cause learning disabilities and cognitive impairment, in which males are affected mild to moderately and females are affected only about 1/3. And just to illustrate it, a normal chromosome, it's supposed to look something like this. And for Fragile X, there's a fragile site right at the tip of the X chromosome. The genetic makeup of this disease, in other words, the genotype of this disease, starts from the FMR1 gene. The Fragile X mental retardation, also known as the FMR gene, in the X chromosome causes a repetition of the CGG, or the cytosine and guanine nucleotides. For normal human beings, the CGG occurs about 6 to 40 times, but for someone with Fragile X, it occurs over 200 times. A male with over 200 repeats is considered to have a full mutation and exhibits Fragile X syndrome, since his one X chromosome is affected, while females are not as affected since their body only needs one X chromosome, and as you hear later on, they have 2. Alright, so we already know that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes that contain the genetic material, known as DNA, that we use for protein productions in our body. The first 22 pairs are identical in both genders, but the last pair determines a person's gender. Okay, so I'm not the best drawer, and this actually kind of looks scary, but bear with me. But males have the X chromosomes from their mom, and then the Y chromosomes from their dad, giving them a total of an XY chromosome. And females have X chromosomes from each parent, giving them a total of 2 X chromosomes. When the FMR1 gene that contains the DNA is thought to be full mutation, it turns completely off and stops producing the proteins that it usually makes, leading to phenotypic effects like large facial features such as large heads and foreheads, chins and ears, and long and narrow face, and loose joints, and flat feet.
So how is Fragile X inherited? Fragile X is inherited in an X-linked dominant pattern. This means the mutated gene which causes the disorder is found on the X chromosome, and it is dominant because one copy of the mutated gene in each cell causes the condition. The gene which causes Fragile X syndrome is called the FMR1 gene. This gene is responsible for making the FMR protein, which helps nerve cells communicate with each other, which is needed for a child's brain to develop correctly. With Fragile X, the mutated FMR1 gene does not make enough of the protein or any of the protein, leading to intellectual disabilities. In addition, since females have 2 X chromosomes, a mutation in one of the 2 copies of a gene can cause the disorder, whereas in males who only have 1 X chromosome, a mutation in their only copy of a gene can cause the disorder. Females with a mutated gene have a high chance of passing the mutated gene onto their child. However, males with the mutation can only pass it to their daughters. This is because their sons would receive the Y chromosome, which does not contain the mutation. In addition to the mutated gene, people with Fragile X sometimes have more copies of a DNA segment called CGG. For most people, the DNA segment repeats 5 to 40 times, whereas people with Fragile X, it repeats more than 200 times. The more the segment repeats, the worse the symptoms are. Now, Fragile X has carrier forms, but not lethal forms. Carrier forms of Fragile X carry a premutation in the FMR1 gene. Although Fragile X carriers do not show symptoms, they are at risk for related disorders such as Fragile X-associated tremor ectasia syndrome, or FXTAS for short. FXTAS is a late-onset disorder which occurs after the age of 50 typically, and causes problems with movement and cognition. Male carriers are usually more affected by FXTAS because they only have one X chromosome, whereas females have two. Women carriers of Fragile X are at risk for primary ovarian insufficiency, which can lead to early menopause. Fragile X has no lethal forms because the disorder poses no major life-threatening concerns. Unfortunately, there are no treatments or medicines which can completely cure Fragile X. However, there are treatments which can help those with Fragile X learn more easily and help them to manage behavior issues. These treatments include special education from school to help with learning, speech, language, occupational, and behavior therapies, and medicines which can help to prevent or minimize symptoms such as seizures, ADD and hyperactivity, and behavior problems. Now you may be wondering if Fragile X can be avoided. Well, Fragile X is a genetic condition and in most cases it cannot be prevented. However, parental testing is available today and in some cases Fragile X can be prevented through the appropriate genetic counseling. Thanks for learning about Fragile X. See you next time!